Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Israel Brief, brought to you as always by Lay of the Land and hosted as always by me, Rolene Marks. Now, in a short while, Israel will bow our heads as we start to commemorate Yom Hazikaron, Memorial Day. But before that starts, let's take a look at those top stories. Yesterday, we brought you the astounding story about the comments that Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, had made. So just to recap, when he was interviewed on a television program in Italy and asked, how does Russia justify their accusations of denazifying Ukraine when the Ukrainian president Volodymyr Zelensky is himself a Jew, and Lavrov is reported to have responded by saying, it doesn't matter that Zelensky is Jewish. Hitler had Jewish blood, and some of the worst anti-Semites are Jewish. Now, this elicited a very, very harsh response from Israel and the Jewish world, and our foreign ministry summoned the Russian ambassador to Israel for a dressing down. Earlier today, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said, when the ambassadors or the diplomats from countries are summoned for dressing downs, the contents of these meetings are kept confidential. And he said, Israel's ambassador to Russia has been summoned several times because Israel has taken a more strong stance in support of Ukraine. However, Lavrov again doubled down on his comments today, saying that Israel is supporting the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv, and that Foreign Minister Lapid's comments that Jews did not murder themselves during the Holocaust was ahistorical. Well, we want to know, is Sergei Lavrov trying to bait Israel into some kind of conflict? At the moment, Israel has taken a very measured stance in the war between Russia and Ukraine because we have a very, very delicate situation on our border with Syria. Russia controls the Syrian skies and has a military presence there. And in order to push back or to be able to strike Iranian targets as they try and encroach on Israeli territory, we need to work in cooperation with the Russian military. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also weighed in on the war of words. He says the accusation that Russia's top diplomats saying that Jewish people are responsible for Nazi crimes, he says, I have no words, and neither do we, but we are continuing to monitor this growing war of words between Israel and Russia. Now, we spoke to you yesterday about the terror attack that took place in Ariel, where a 23-year-old security guard, Vyacheslav Golev, was murdered and managed to save the life of his fiancée, also a security guard, by shielding her body with his own. Well, Hamas have claimed responsibility for this terror attack. It's quite a rare occurrence or departure from Hamas's usual stance. Normally, they applaud terror attacks but don't claim responsibility. They have said that the situation in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they see it as being violated. We want to take this opportunity to remind them that playing football, wearing shoes, stockpiling weapons, and firing firecrackers in a mosque is a violation of a holy sanctity and historical site, and is grossly offensive to Muslims all around the world, which they are responsible for doing. But that's another argument, and they have vowed that they will continue to carry out more terror attacks. Now, of course, we are watching what is happening between Russia and Ukraine very, very closely. And moments ago, I explained to you what Israel's stance is and why we have taken a measured response. But it does look like Israel is starting to mull whether or not we should expand our defensive aid to Ukraine. Now, according to Haaretz newspaper and several other daily publications, including the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel, Israeli officials are discussing whether or not to expand aid, and it does look fairly likely. We know that Israel has sent an incredible amount of humanitarian aid, but has faced criticism for not sending defensive aid. Officials in the Israeli government have said there are many things that Israel can assist with in defense of Ukraine. However, we will not be sending air defense or attack systems to help with the situation there. And it has been reported just moments ago that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, could formally declare war on Ukraine. Now, many of you might be asking, hasn't he done this already? Well, he's acted in a state of war, but hasn't formally declared a war against Ukraine. At the beginning of this broadcast, I mentioned that Israel is approaching Memorial Day. Hence, we've taken on a more solemn tone to our broadcast today. When the sun sets and the siren goes off at 8 o'clock tonight, Israelis will gather for ceremonies to remember the 24,068 fallen soldiers, police and security force personnel who have fallen in defense of the state since the beginning of the modern state of Israel in 1948. We will also remember the thousands of victims of terror. Now, a formal number has not been published as of yet. We are expecting it either later today or early tomorrow morning. But this is probably the most solemn and almost sacred day in Israel's calendar, and is back to back with Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Independence Day, which we will start to celebrate as the sun goes down tomorrow. As I speak, the entertainment channels are all going to start changing their programming to reflect honoring the lives and the personal stories of those we have lost, falling in defense of this country. We cannot take for granted, and we don't any day, the cost of having a state of our own. And for me, and I'm sure for many of you, this year feels more poignant, especially as we've had a month and just a couple of days ago, another terror attack that has claimed the lives of somebody gone far too soon. I don't think there is a family in this country that hasn't been touched by the loss of somebody falling in battle, falling in defense, or on a mission for their country, or as a result of a terror attack. As many of you know, a member of the Chai FM family, where I broadcast every day, his son was murdered in a terror attack just over 6 months ago, something that has greatly affected the South African Jewish community. So we are all touched by this, and these next 24 hours are going to be spent remembering, honoring, and also expressing our gratitude for the ultimate price that many have paid so that we can live in freedom in a state of our own. Now, as I mentioned, a siren will blast at 8 o'clock tonight. This is the same siren I spoke about last week for Yom HaShoah. It's not the red alert siren that some of you might be familiar with. This is a siren that just gives a monotone wail, and it really pierces the soul. A ceremony at the Kotel, at the Wailing Wall, will take place, and tomorrow morning at around 11 a.m. another siren will ring out across the country as we gather for various ceremonies and to honor our fallen. Lay of the Land and the Israel Brief salutes the 24,068 men and women, Israeli Defense Force, security and police personnel, some whose names are familiar and some we will never know, and thank them for their service. So that brings us to the end of today's edition of the Israel Brief. Just a reminder, our website is www.layoftheland.online. Please go and read all our original content. It is there. Our Facebook page is at Lottel's site. If you haven't joined us, please do so by liking us, following us, and sharing our content. Our YouTube channel is at the Israel Brief, and the more of you who subscribe, the more we are able to get Israel's narrative out to as many people as possible. And on Twitter, we're at Lay of the Land 5. I'm Rolie Marks. This is the Israel Brief. Thank you for watching, and I'll join you again tomorrow.